This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my two best friends and one of their moms as well. I was home for the holidays from college, and my friend Sarah invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Rachel. I didn't really have any other plans, so I decided it would be a good idea to go with them. We went to a really cool city about an hour from where we all live, and it was very big on shopping and resorts as well. We planned to have a pretty calm night all in all. Watch the ball drop at a block party thing downtown, have a few drinks at the bar. Since we were on the west coast, the ball drop was at 9 or so. This meant that about 8, we ventured out from our hotel, walking to the block party that was only about a mile away. On the way there, we passed by a very lively bar. We decided to stop by real quick. We spent about 15 minutes dancing, but didn't really get any drinks. It was a gay bar, and Sarah and Rachel being gay, they were pretty stoked on finding this place. They wanted to come back after the ball drop, even though it was about 90% men there. We continued on to the block party, got some dinner, grabbed a glass of champagne. The ball dropped, and they had a DJ as well, so we spent about an hour there dancing with everyone. After we got pretty tired of this, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until about midnight or so. Once we got there, Sarah's mom paid for a drink for each of us, but left soon after that because she was really tired. It was about 10:30 at this point. Sarah, Rachel, and I are all enjoying our drinks and having a lot of fun dancing. Rachel then tried some of mine since it was one she had never had before. I constantly had my guard up drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because it was 90% gay men as well, who I thought would have no interest in me. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the very last thing I remember. The rest I've gathered from Sarah and Rachel. Almost immediately after grabbing that second drink, I asked Rachel to go to the bathroom with me because I was not feeling well at all, even though I had been completely fine just 10 minutes before this. Once in the bathroom, I collapsed on the floor and became almost unresponsive. Rachel was now extremely worried and somehow dragged my half-lifeless body out to where Sarah was waiting for us. Security, upon seeing my condition, assumed I was wasted and asked us to leave immediately. Sarah and Rachel decided to take me back to the hotel about a half-mile away. By this point, I was completely unconscious though, and there were barely any sounds escaping from my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us and began walking near all three of us, but they were too preoccupied with trying to keep my dead-weight, lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I even vomited all over everything, both of them, the sidewalk, etc. The next part of the story we had to get from Sarah, and Rachel doesn't have memory of this either. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Rachel, trying to get her to go grab a drink with him. She was very agitated and told him to leave. Her friend needed help right now, obviously. He would not take no for an answer, and followed us down the street. A middle-aged woman witnessed this and came up and told the man off, something along the lines of "Stop harassing these young women or I'll call the police." He basically ran away after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife enjoying the holiday ran into us as well. He checked me out to make sure something wasn't majorly wrong, and then carried me the rest of the way to my hotel and into the room. My friends could barely even hold up my weight. They thanked the man profusely, and him and his wife left. This is where Rachel's memory suddenly kicks back in. Only 5 minutes later, they got a knock on the door. It's the EMT and his wife again. They'd come by to let us know that a man had followed us into the hotel. They'd just seen him hop over the gate and start making his way directly to our room. My friends called hotel security, but they were unable to find the guy in the end. My friends didn't get a good glimpse of him, but I'm 100% sure it was that same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body and dry heaving after that. I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My very last memory was at the bar getting that second drink. My friends filled me in on everything that had happened. Feeling like crap, I thought I must have just drank way too much, but I had never blacked out before in my life, and the amount of drinks I'd had, 2 in 2 hours, didn't add up to me being completely knocked out like that. We decided my first drink had to have been drugged, and since Rachel had some of it, it affected her as well somewhat, even though she was still fully functional. I'm sure that man that was talking to Rachel and then followed us back was the one who had slipped something into my drink. To this day, I really don't know how that could have even happened though. I got my drink directly from the bar and never even set it down once. My guess was that it was already in the cup when I received it. Thankfully, I had a really good friend and lots of kind strangers protecting me that night, but it still keeps me up at night, thinking what could have happened under different circumstances. So this was back in January of 2018. It took me a few years and a little bit of therapy to even be able to talk about this. I'm okay now though, so I thought I would share this. It's a little bit long, but buckle up. I was part of a study abroad program in Bangkok, which was awesome for the record. Not long after being there, my fellow students and I went out for a night on the town. After a night of a bit of drinking and running amok in Bangkok, we somehow ended up in this back alley illegal strip club. Here's where I think it's important to mention that I'm female, and I was the only female in the group that night. I saw things I will never unsee in the 15 minutes we were there, and it honestly keeps me up at night every once in a while. Let's just say it was pretty blatantly obvious the woman did not want to be there. Very quickly, I also did not want to be there. About 5 minutes into this really misguided decision, I realized two guys from my group were talking to a guy in a red polo shirt. Oh man, there were many guys in red polo shirts scattered throughout the room, and none of them looked very pleasant to be around. One of my friends, let's call him M, came back over to me laughing, pointed back at the red shirt guy, and said, "Hey, he's trying to get me to sell you to him for $10 American. I keep telling him you're worth more, but 10 is the highest he says he'll go." I've never noped out of a situation so fast in my entire life, and everyone went with me. I'm an experienced traveler, so I did take the opportunity to use this as a learning experience for M. I taught him how quickly these situations can go south, and how important it is to be on your guard always in a foreign country. I thought he'd learned his lesson. We'd all gotten out safe, so no harm, no foul. I'll admit though that after that I did become a little more withdrawn from the group. Everyone would go out partying every single night. I went to school, occasionally ate out, and did some daytime shopping at the markets, or maybe hung out in a high-end spa near the hotel. For like 20 to 50 American dollars, you can get pampered like a queen, and a broke college kid of course took advantage of that. 2 other girls joined me on my adventures, and we had a pretty great time overall actually. Before we were scheduled to return back to the States, my other classmates, okay, it was all M, finally convinced me to go out for a night on the town with them to some strip. People were eating scorpions on a stick. Some dumb girl from Australia who had joined our group took a hit of some gas they were selling on the street and vomited everywhere, and people were packed elbow to elbow. There was a lot of rave-style lights and music. Big sensory overload. I figured I was with a group of 20 people from the US and Australia. If there was a time to drink and party in a foreign country, this would be it. So the drinking started, and the partying began. With drinking, of course, eventually comes the need for a restroom as well. I told M I was going to find one, and I would be right back. M chose that moment to be a diva though, starting to hammer back drinks and demanding everyone's attention. I must have been gone 10 minutes tops. I come back and everyone is gone. I got the story later that the Aussies left and the rest of my group had to chase down M when he ran off in a drunken display for attention. I walk over to the entrance of this strip where we all dropped off and sit down on a picnic table near all the cabs to wait for my group. An hour goes by, 2 hours, 2.5 hours goes by. It's almost 1 a.m. now. The street is still packed, but I've seen not one single person from my group. I was starting to get a little bit concerned. I realized I had no idea where we were really. The others had been coming to this strip every night, but this was my first time. Fuck. Okay, experienced traveler time. I didn't have the address to the hotel written down in English or in Thai, and I don't speak Thai either. Luckily, I hadn't had a drink in 2.5 hours, so I was getting pretty sober at this point. I had been there long enough to know that taking a tuk-tuk, those open wheelie cab things, were much cheaper than taking an actual cab. I had not been there long enough, though, to realize that taking a tuk-tuk at 1 a.m. alone as a female was a very bad idea. I showed the driver my room key to tell him where I needed to go. What a naive child I was. We negotiated a price and I hopped in. He started going the opposite direction from where our cab came in from to drop us off initially. We took a highway to get there, but my tuk-tuk driver was on all residential streets. Then he wandered into an alley. Okay, I was on red alert right now. He stopped. I poised, ready to strike should I need to. Next to me on my left, a garage door rolled up, and a group of men walked out, one of who was holding a blue purse. I stuck around just long enough to see him start walking over and unzipping said purse as he moved. I bolted. I barely managed to shake off the tuk-tuk driver. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, crying because I couldn't breathe. I thought to myself I was going to die because I could never be bothered to go to a gym. I kept running and running until finally I saw it. The familiarity of home. A 7-Eleven in the middle of this Thai neighborhood. I was hysterical as I sprinted through that door like the Kool-Aid Man himself. The cashier started yelling at me to get out in Thai. I was desperately yelling in English that my tuk-tuk driver had just tried to sell me, and I was not going anywhere. We go at it for a minute or two of me begging him to help me, when this tiny little 4-foot elderly Thai woman came up to me with an equally tiny grocery cart full of 2-liter bottles of Pepsi. She took my hand and my room key. She never said a single word to me, not one. She led me outside, hailed a cab, and had a solid 60-second conversation with the driver, then pushed me into the back seat. The scariest part of my entire night, though, was that 15-minute cab ride back to my hotel. I couldn't possibly know if that little Thai woman had just helped me or sold me out to the highest bidder. The cab driver had to stop and ask for directions about 3 minutes from the hotel, so that was probably the moment I knew this was going to affect me mentally for a while. The ride cost me 10 American, and I tipped him $60. For not trying to sell me as a slave. This happened a couple of years ago, but I finally feel like I'm ready to talk about it. In 2016, I had just turned 18 years old and was in my second semester of community college. I was lucky to get to take a few specialized classes that were requirements from my major. These classes required me to drive about 45 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the main campus of my community college system. That's relevant because I was going to a town I did not know very well, and I also didn't know anyone who lived there either. There was this man in my class named Eddie. He was a big guy in his late 40s or so. I'm all of 5'0", and at the time I was about 130 pounds. That is to say, I was pretty small and defenseless. We spent a lot of time in the lab for these classes, and he was always stationed right across from me. I was a bit more naive and unsuspecting at that time, and wanted to be nice. I talked with him and my other classmates quite a bit, and was a lot friendlier to him than I would be nowadays. He started being overly friendly to me, and would stand too close or ask too many personal questions. He'd flirt with me in the class as well, to the point it seemed to make other people around uncomfortable to watch. He started to stare at me a lot, with this really intense look that honestly kind of scared me. Of course, being young and not wanting to hurt his feelings, I decided to ignore it as best I could. I told my boyfriend about it, but again, Eddie hadn't actually ever done anything wrong to me, so there wasn't a lot I felt like I could do in return. A few weeks after this all started, all of us were hanging out in a small break room type area, studying for an exam for our next class. It was about 30 minutes away or so. I was sitting at one table chatting with some middle-aged woman in my class, and Eddie was at the next table over messing around with his phone. I announced that I was going to get something from the vending machine and stood up to leave. As I did so, he tried and failed to discreetly turn his phone toward me and snapped a picture of me as I walked away to the machine, got my drink, and bent over to pick it up. I realized what was going on as I was walking back, with him still taking photos of me. I shot him a dirty look. He put his phone away and just sat there staring at me from then on. I was trying my best to look pissed, but honestly I was just really freaked out. Who just takes pictures of people like that? I excused myself from the table and called my boyfriend near tears, telling him about this weirdness. He was angry and said that I needed to tell someone, but I said no because I didn't want to make a scene. He tried his best to comfort me as much as he could, but I had to go to class soon afterwards. Our last class finished at about 9 p.m., and since it was January, it was completely pitch black out when we all walked out to our cars. I was actually in the middle of texting one of my guy friends about what had happened when Eddie walked up to my car, stopped for a moment, looked at me through my windshield, and then slowly kept walking, watching me through my driver's side window the whole time. He was parked nowhere near me, and the wind chill was below zero as well, so he had to have made a point to walk by my car like that. I was terrified. With my hands shaking, I started my car and drove home as fast as I could, calling my boyfriend on the way and crying. After that, I decided finally I needed to talk to my professor about what was going on. I was extremely nervous, but I asked her the next week if I could talk to her privately when the class was over. We went over to her office, and I told her all about Eddie and what he had done, and how he was acting weird toward me. She told me she had noticed that I tensed up and went quiet whenever he got close to me, and had noticed him paying a lot of attention to me as well. She told me she believed me about the pictures. She was honestly amazing with how she handled all this. She promised me she would move things around to where I'd be away from him in the lab. She asked if I wanted her to talk to him about it as well. I said no. I didn't want to make him angrier than he already was, and she said she'd respect that. She was going to have the security guard stand at the door though and watch me go to my car every night. She'd tell the program director as well what was going on, but Eddie wouldn't know that I had talked to her. By the time we got all this done, it had been 30 minutes since class had ended. She offered to walk me outside together. I'm glad that she did, because the moment we came out of the elevator to the first floor, Eddie was sitting there in the foyer all alone. Every single other person had gone home. My blood immediately ran cold, but I tried my best to act as normal as I could. He seemed quite surprised to see our professor there as well, as she was to see him. When she asked him why he was still there after so long, he said he'd noticed my car was still parked out front and wanted to make sure I wouldn't have to walk out by myself. I'm pretty sure I must have been pale as a ghost, but my professor gave him a look I couldn't read and said not to worry. She was walking me to my car, and from now on the security guard would be there every single night. He quickly said that was good and walked away saying good night. It still gives me chills to think about what could have happened if my professor didn't walk me down to my car that night. I have no idea what he was capable of doing. After this, she rearranged our seating and made sure we were never grouped together. I started making sure I walked out to my car at the same time as a few other women in my class as well. The security guard was usually in the foyer by then. We only had a couple months left of this class as well, so there wasn't really much time for any other incidents. I would still catch him staring at me sometimes though, and giving me looks of pure rage. It's been a few years since then. I don't go to that school anymore, and I'm moving to a completely different city soon. I'm a lot more assertive and stronger now, but I still hope I never meet Eddie ever again. This happened earlier last year, and it still fucks me up if I even think about it too much. For a little background story to explain, I'm a delivery driver for Uber Eats, and I've been doing it as a side gig for the past year or so to earn some extra money. Also, I'm a female. Anyway, yeah, Uber Eats. It's a super chill job, although the pay is definitely not ideal, especially during nights. Normally, any pings I get after 10 p.m. are just shitty fast food orders to customers where the chances of being tipped are even lower than what they already are, which is low in and of itself. I would say only 2 in 10 people tip on Uber Eats, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, late night deliveries very rarely profitable, which is why I would very rarely ever do them. However, on this night last year, there happened to be a big bonus going on. Reach 15 deliveries in a certain time frame to get an extra $75. Well, that's music to my ears. When that's the case, late night deliveries rock, because there's no traffic at all, and it doesn't matter where you're picking up from either. McDonald's schmickdonalds, bring on the bonuses. The faster you can get them done, the faster you can get home and knock out. Open roads all the way works just fine for me. I was on a big roll and finished my last Mickey D's run at 2:30 in the morning. I cashed in my bonus and called it a night. For context, this took place in downtown San Diego. Downtown San Diego has fun restaurants and clubs at the core, but as you branch out it gets a lot more seedy. Once you arrive past 16th Street, it gets really sketchy. Lots of homeless camps, the whole works. I tried to actively avoid that area, but in order to get back home and on the freeway, I had to pass through that neighborhood at least a little. One more piece of info, I drive a 2002 shitty Ford Focus, and nothing is automatic. In order to roll the windows up or down, you have to reach over and crank the lever. Because it's a hassle to roll them up and down manually each time, when I do deliveries, I usually just keep both my windows rolled down. It's easier to pick up and deliver through windows that way. This night, fuck me, I had the windows down as usual. I was planning on rolling them up before I passed 16th Street where the homeless camp was, but I didn't even get that far. As I turned down a side street heading toward the main drag, up ahead I see a man in one of those orange reflective construction vests, standing off to the side of the road. There's always some sort of construction going on downtown, and it's pretty common for it to happen at night when most people aren't using the roads, so I didn't really think too much of this. As I began to get closer, the man sprinted into the middle of the street and began waving his arms, signaling for me to stop. I started to slow down, thinking maybe he was going to redirect traffic or reroute me or something. I broke down to 10 miles per hour, then 5, leaving distance to figure out what I'm supposed to do in this moment. He breaks out into a jog towards my car though, and stops directly in front of it, blocking me and my car from moving forward. Fuck. Immediate unease. This is too weird. I wished I had remembered to roll my windows up. It was 3 a.m. on a dark street, and there was not a soul around except me and this dude. People talk about fight or flight, and I've always wondered how I would react in a situation that warranted a similar response. Now I know my reaction is to freeze, because as I was slowing down, it hit me 5 seconds later than it should have. This guy was obviously not a construction worker. Yes, he did have on a hard hat and a vest, and also the creepiest smile I had ever seen in my life now that he had caught me. At first glance, I thought he was smiling just to be friendly, but smiling to acknowledge someone longer than a few seconds is super unnerving. Just try it right now. Count to 5 in your head while grinning like a madman and you'll see what I mean. That's what this guy was doing. Now that he was directly in front of me, I could tell he must be homeless. Older guy, I would guess in his 60s. But homelessness has a special way of making everyone look old, so who knows really. Now he was just staring at me, wild-eyed and smiling, all teeth. His smile and mannerisms, the best way I can describe it is Twisty from American Horror Story. Literally though, I could just tell from looking at him that this guy was having an episode. I obviously should have reversed in that moment, but my brain was panicking and I couldn't think that fast. I was frozen in my car, thinking this would be the moment I would die. The whole time he did not say a single thing. He just stood there leering. All of a sudden, like a movie ninja, he hopped up onto the hood of my car and began slamming his fist down on my hood and windshield. I was frozen in terror, just watching this man pounding on my car, crawling around on his hands and knees like the Grudge. He's not saying anything either. He's just crawling and staring at me. That was the most horrifying part. Somehow he never once broke eye contact during all of this, and never stopped grinning either. The thought of my window still being open made me want to throw up. but at the same time breaking eye contact and moving to roll them up felt a lot scarier. Like if I made any sudden moves or looked away, it would be the perfect time for him to try to come inside the car and strike. Still, he never uttered a single sound. I think it would have been less scary if he had said anything, but he didn't. He just pounded his fists on the car and stared. In all reality, this whole encounter probably lasted 15 seconds, but it felt like I was stuck there for days. I was freaking out, and before I could gain the sense to do anything remotely intelligent, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror coming up from behind me down the street. The man saw this too, and in an instant, he leapt off of my car and broke off in a run behind me, heading straight towards the new car. Jesus Christ, what the hell is this? I floored it and didn't look back until I was halfway home on the freeway. At this point, it was all adrenaline. For a long time after that, I stopped delivering at night altogether. I sure as hell don't go down to that section of downtown anymore. Instead, I just take the longer route home. I also don't drive with the windows down at night if it's an area that's even remotely run down. What I realized from this is how naive I could be to just automatically trust and obey someone just because they have a uniform on. I didn't even question slowing down at first, even though the whole situation was sketchy as fuck. It was actually quite the opposite. In my mind, I was comforted by the fact that now somebody trustworthy was on the road. I guess my subconscious thoughts went like, oh nice, a public servant doesn't want me making a wrong turn. By the time I stopped, it would have already been too late if this guy wanted to attack me. I shudder thinking about it. I calmed down eventually by reassuring myself this was just probably a crazy dude on drugs who meant no harm. Hopefully that is the case, and for my own peace of mind, I'm going to choose to believe that it is. But what got to me is the fact that this guy was dressed as a road worker, on the road, deliberately behaving at first in a way to lead me to believe he was one. Why else wear that getup? And why were you trying to pull cars over? Just to freak people out? I don't know the answer, and I'm glad I didn't find out what it was he really wanted from me. Fucking yikes. There's this hotel by the Bulgarian Seaside, in which we have an apartment. To be honest, that's a very strong word for it. It's basically just a big room with a giant bed, refrigerator, and big windows on both of the walls. I guess it also has a small bathroom as well. It's on the ground floor, and again, both of the walls are facing the parking lot of the hotel. Despite all of this though, it's perfect for me alone. It's situated right next to the beach, and that's why I've been spending some of my summer vacations there recently. So, July 3 years ago, I'm spending a week with my ex-boyfriend there, and 3 to 4 weeks alone by myself after that. My ex always said that the owners of the hotel were a bunch of creeps. Whenever we went out of the room, he had to walk a path passing through the reception, where they used to sit all day doing nothing. The old dad in his 60s, I guess, his son Crumb, who was about 40, and his daughter, who was 45. Her husband would also sometimes join them. When you'd pass by, they'd just all get silent immediately and stare at you. Every single time. I was used to this behavior after a while, but the boyfriend was very irritated, especially when he caught Crumb staring at my ass and smiling. After that, he used to stare him down deadly, right in the eyes whenever he got the chance. Soon, my ex went back to the city. It was now the 3rd week I'd been alone. The night was extremely hot, so I opened both windows wide open and put the curtains above them to defend myself from being peeked at. After all, I was at the ground level and my bed was right below both of the windows. I woke up in the middle of the night and suddenly felt like someone was watching me. This happened for the next few nights as well. I'm easily scared and paranoid, but I was alone there, so I had been telling myself to chill out. It must just be my crazy mind trying to scare itself. Some nights went by without problem. Meanwhile, Crumb tried to talk to me 2 to 3 times when I was off to the beach. It was around 1 a.m. now. I was falling asleep when I began to hear footsteps outside the path. It was not exactly strange. There were some people staying next to me at the same kind of apartment. Maybe someone was coming home or going out partying late at night. Then, though, the steps stopped really close by outside. I could hear all of this because of the opened windows. I was sitting in the bed now and listening when I noticed that the door handle was moving slowly up and down. I lost my shit but stayed quiet. I silently thanked myself for remembering to lock the door before I'd gone to bed. After a while of silently jimmying the handle, nothing happened and the person walked away. I closed the windows after that. I called my dad and told him what just happened. He told me to lock and close everything, and he'd come grab me in the morning. It's a 5-hour drive. This was 3 years ago. Last night we were having dinner together, and my dad said, "Hey, do you remember your sea adventures?" He proceeded to tell me he had made his own little investigation back in the day and asked the owners of the hotel for security camera records. They checked the ones in the parking lot and saw a male figure skulking around. The part with the door handle was not in the camera range, unfortunately. My dad remembers my strange midnight waking up routine and told them to check the older records as well. In each of them, they saw a man peeking through my windows, trying to grab through the curtains, standing like that for 15 to 20 minutes each time. The woman finally recognized her brother and told my dad he had mental disabilities. She begged him not to press any charges and that they'd promised to take better care of him and look after him from then on. My dad, being a good guy, did not press charges. It appears that now we're selling the apartment. So, anyone interested in buying, perhaps? I was 19 years old, and the only female working at a shop specializing in automotive batteries and things of that nature. I had been working there long enough to realize that most of the clientele was male, and oftentimes that made for some awkward situations. For instance, I would get talked down to and patronized quite a bit, or flirted with to the point where I would be somewhat uncomfortable. I have a really thick skin though, thankfully, so most of the time I typically wasn't very bothered. One day, during a particularly busy rush, a very tall and well-built man, who was maybe in his mid-30s, came in through my line. I consider myself to be pretty good at reading people, and this guy was giving off some very, very strange vibes. Something about him seemed a little bit off. However, it was my job to be professional and assist whoever came through my line regardless, so I brushed aside those uneasy feelings. I just wanted to ring this guy out and get through the rest of the line that was now trailing out the front door. I greeted and talked to him as I would any other customer while I was processing his transaction. Things were going pretty fine actually, until he realized I was almost done. He started stalling and making up weird excuses as to why he couldn't use certain credit cards. Now he needed me to put his battery on hold. He would come back later, etc. I told him I would hold it for him and he could come back whenever he found the time in the future. I figured he would just leave at that point, but instead he stood there and stared at me. Now that I think about it, it was more like he was staring through me rather than at me. I was a bit uneasy, but I kept my polite and professional demeanor. Sir, if you're not purchasing anything at the moment, may I ask you to please step aside so that I can assist all these other customers? He completely disregarded my question though, and in a slow, raspy voice, he asked, "So, what's your name?" I didn't wear a name tag specifically for reasons like this. Customers had found me on Facebook before in the past, and it was quite unsettling. Thinking quickly, I threw out my nickname instead. "It's Rhea." "Rhea," he said, as he kept on staring through me. I smiled awkwardly. "Yep, that's me." By this point, my manager had realized what was going on and proceeded to ask the man to step aside as well. After hearing it from my manager, the man walked to a corner of the store by some shelving and continued to stare while I wrung the rest of the customers out. A bit of time went by, and the line had since cleared up. but he was still standing there, staring and now smiling the most sickening smile I think I've ever seen. It made my skin crawl. Of course, my manager and coworker saw this as well. My coworker grabbed my arm and said, "Come on, dude, let's go to the back instead." As we were walking into the stock room, my manager walked over to ask the man if there was anything else he needed. The man muttered that there wasn't and left. I wish that was the end of it, but of course he had to come back in to purchase the battery. When he came back the next day, we again had a long line. He even let people go ahead of him and waited until I was completely free before coming up to the counter to make his purchase. I greeted him again and tried my best to remain professional, but it was hard considering how creeped out by this guy I was. I was met again with that same vacant stare and that freaky fucking smile. I can't remember exactly the entire conversation, but at some point the questions he was asking became weird and inappropriate enough for my coworker to cut in on my behalf. He looked at the guy, then over at me. "Hey Rhea, why don't you go take your break instead?" He basically pushed me out of the way and rang the guy out instead of me. I stayed in the back until my manager came and got me, telling me it was safe to come out. We were all pretty weirded out by this, but of course that would be the end of it, right? A few days went by. We had all mostly forgotten about this creepy dude, until he walked in again. This time though, he didn't even look through the store. He didn't approach the counter. He didn't say a single word to anyone. He just stood in the back, pulled his hood up over his head, and hid in the very corner of the store, staring at me and smiling. His smile had become even wider and more sinister looking. At this point, I really started to freak out. I started shaking and feeling sick to my stomach. My manager came and screamed at the guy. "Hey you, I'm sick of you coming into my store and pulling this crap. If you're not gonna buy anything, get out." The creep paid him no mind though. He kept on staring at me. This of course pissed my manager off. He walked out from around the corner and told the dude, "Look man, if you don't quit coming in here and staring, I will not hesitate to call the cops. What you're doing is harassment, so get the hell out of my store." At the mention of the police, this dude's smile turned into a snarl, and he slowly sauntered out of the store. We never saw him again after that, but I was immediately taken off closing shifts, due to the fear that the man would come back and try to catch me when I was there alone. I've definitely dealt with my fair share of creeps at that job, but this guy was by far the most disturbing. My junior year of college, I moved into a large house with 4 people on the first floor, 5 on the second, and 2 people upstairs who we didn't really talk to. This house was very old, but it seemed normal enough at first glance, at least until I went down to the basement for the first time. There was this washing machine and dryer down there that never worked, so we had no real reason to ever go down there except for parties. The weirdest part of this room was towards the back of the basement. It was always locked, and it always gave me an overwhelming sense of fear anytime I even got near it. Apparently, when my roommates had first moved in, that room was not locked. One of the girls had been looking around in there and found several human teeth and what she described as strange tools. Not too long after that, the landlord, who had only just recently purchased the property, locked up that door, and it had never been opened since. Fast forward a few months, I had recently woken up from a nap and was cooking some food on the stove. I was the only person there on our floor. Suddenly, the hallway light to my left turned off with no warning. I shrugged, assuming the light must have burnt out on its own. Then though, it turned back on. The light switch for that light was on the stairwell on the other side of a closed door. So I waited for a minute, only for the light to turn off by itself again. I ran over to the door quickly and threw it open, thinking someone had to be fucking with me. But no one was there. I walked downstairs. There was nobody on that floor either. Now I was a little freaked out. I still just told myself though it must be an electrical problem or something. I go back to making my food. Immediately, the light turns off and on again. I kinda stood there for a few seconds. Then music started to play. It was coming from the living room, which was right next to the kitchen, out of sight. Now I was feeling relieved, thinking someone must have been home after all. I walked out into the living room, only to see a closed laptop sitting on a ledge near the window, connected to some speakers. The television was on one of those static channels, just like in the movies. I slowly walked toward the speakers when I realized the laptop had been turned off. I unplugged them, and the music stopped. I really wish I could remember what song was playing, but I obviously had other thoughts in my mind in that moment. That was when the chills sunk in. I turned off the stove, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove away. A few weeks later, I told my roommates about what had happened, hoping someone would confess to the very elaborate prank they had just pulled on me. Instead, though, every single person got kinda quiet, and each one by one, started admitting to weird shit that had happened to them, too. One of the girls claimed that she would often wake up in the middle of the night and hear noises coming from inside her closet. Sometimes the hangers would move around, like someone had just bumped into them. Another friend said he often heard weird noises, like footsteps above him. When he walked upstairs, though, nobody was home. Another guy told us he had woken up in the middle of the night to see a dark figure standing right in the center of our kitchen, staring into his room, before it walked into the stairwell and disappeared from his sight. A little late to the thread, so this might not get too many reads, but I'll post this anyways. So, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I went over to a friend's house after school. My friend's house was located on a relatively quiet street and had a large backyard surrounded by woods. Well, my friend and I decided it'd be a good day to build a tree fort. We'd build it out in the woods behind his house. We rounded up some of the necessary tools and brought his little brother to tag along as well. Some background to the story. There had recently been some daytime coyote spotting in the area, so we were nervous already to begin with. I even remember discussing with my friend and his younger brother our plan to smash any attacking coyotes with a hammer. In retrospect, that probably wouldn't have worked too well, but like I said, we were all very little kids. As we were walking along the path out into the woods, I can vividly remember looking down at the trail while walking and conversing with my friend, when all of a sudden my friend's younger brother stopped dead in his tracks and remained standing there motionless. Before I even knew what was going on, I noticed my friend also stop suddenly, so naturally I did the same. I looked up to see just what it was that was frightening them. I can still very clearly remember this image. I could see in the middle of the woods, there was this older woman, I'd guess mid to late 70s if we had to say an age. She had this waving, curly grayish white hair and was dressed in a white gown. She was roughly 25 yards ahead of us, just standing there. She wasn't moving, completely motionless, not even looking at us, but rather directly through us, if that makes any sense. I still get the chills even thinking of that image now, but it's still so clear in my mind. What I'm about to say next might seem like a little bit of a stretch, and it was more than likely my imagination getting the better of me. However, I swore there was like a faint aura of white around the woman. My friends and I have also since discussed this incident, and they too described some sort of light radiating off of her. After standing paralyzed for what seemed like several moments, we watched as the woman slowly raised her right arm and pointed the direction in which we'd come and started walking slowly towards us. Almost immediately, just like a scene from a movie, we all screamed and dropped our tools, nails, and pieces of woods for the treehouse. We sprinted back towards my friend's house. All of us frantically told my friend's mom what we'd seen. But to no one's surprise, she just dismissed it as childhood imagination. We're all now over 20 years old, and we're still in agreement that we saw a glowing white-haired woman dressed in a white gown in the middle of the woods that day.